Hi, everyone. We are
Hello.
back earlier than expected, and we have an amazing speaker today, Patricia Thaine. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So just a quick introduction. Patricia is the co-founder and CEO of Private AI. It's leading a team of experts in developing cutting-edge solutions for identifying, reducing, and removing personally identifiable information across 52 languages in text, audio, images, and documents using AI. Private AI's mission is to create a privacy layer for software and enhance compliance with current regulations such as the GDPR. Private AI allows companies to unlock the value of the data they collect, whether it's structured or unstructured. Patricia holds advanced degrees in computer science and linguistics from the University of Toronto and McGill University and is currently pursuing her PhD. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Elena. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, welcome, Patricia. I mean, this topic is so interesting because literally during our last talk last week, when we were discussing open versus closed AI models, someone in the audience actually asked us this particular question. How is it even possible? How can I make sure that my personally identifiable information is not being used in AI models training data sets? And here we are today, having you kind of, try, to educate us on what's going on and what your company is doing. So, and I guess we're going to learn a bit more whether, machines do have us or they do not have us, hopefully not. And this is the topic that we're going to focus on today. Um, and Patricia, take it away. We're all ears.
Sounds great. Yeah, happy to chat. So this has been a problem for a few years now, but it's only really gotten interest in part because of everything that's been going on with ChatGPT. It seems to have awakened the public to why privacy is important, and even to the extent where the US federal government proposed a bipartisan bill at Congress for a federal privacy legislation, which if you asked any privacy expert 2 years ago, they would have said this sounds like a pipe dream and is never going to happen. But we are here at this point in time, thanks to a lot of what's been going on in the world over the last year and a bit. So I can share a few slides to go over this topic.
Yeah, federal AI privacy bill. We were just stipulating like a few months back. No, that's never gonna happen. That's gonna take like a few more years. It still might, but we're
It
gonna have
still
to.
might not gonna happen.
Yeah. But at least the draft is there, so we weren't even counting on that.
Yeah,
Not everyone is
exactly. And
happy about it.
there's a big push for it, so that is very nice. I wanted to give a little bit of a timeline to show how quickly things moved, and things moving this quickly with regards to getting worldwide attention into privacy um, it's pretty rare. We did see, for example, the GDPR come into play in 2018, and companies starting to struggle to get their affairs in order as a result of it. But this timeline is really interesting. November 30th, 2022, you've got the OpenAI launch of ChatGPT. Then you had OpenAI have its first data leak in in March 21st, 2023. And it was an accidental data leak where different chat histories were exposed to other users. Accidents happen, but one of the core things here is that you do really want to limit the amount of personal information you're sending over to third parties, no matter how much you trust them, because accidents do indeed happen. And then March 31st, ChatGPT gets banned in Italy, and Italy's privacy watchdog. That's what they called the folks over in Italy talking about the data breach concerns of ChatGPT. And then French digital minister said ChatGPT doesn't respect privacy laws in April 7th, 2023. And what we saw next was a proposal of the EU AI Act about a year later. right? So this was already, or an approval of the UA Act. This was already in the works, but there was a lot more momentum as a result of everybody's attention being paid to ChatGPT and what LLMs can do. And then this April, just a month later after the UA Act was approved, there's that federal US privacy bill that Congress has unveiled. So we're talking about a timeline of a little bit over a year. And this thing that we thought would never happen seems to be happening. And so a few things to keep in mind with regards to what may or may not change is what organizations need to follow with regards to privacy legislations in general and personally identifiable information. And each of these legislations have different ways of treating the information depending on the purposes for the data, and also different definitions of what personally identifiable information is. Oftentimes you'll have people think that personal information is entire names and maybe credit cards, but then they don't really think about the whole scope of personal information that are covered by these legislations. And also the purpose of these can be for different reasons. You've got some that are for preventing the re-identification of individuals, some for preventing identity theft, such as PCI compliance, so payment card industry information. We're talking credit cards, SSNs, things like that. And oftentimes you'll find them in even call and contact center or automatic speech recognition data. So you'll want to be really careful about how you deal with that data, because it's also in very messy environments, multilingual, and I'll get a bit into also how complex it can be. Make sense so far?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I was on mute.
Great.
I said it makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously the AI is all encompassing, and businesses who are thinking about already integrating the technology, they need to work across the board with multiple things. You just need to have you need to comply with just tons of regulations, and everything is kind of touching, and it's just a lot of happening. And
yeah, it's very overwhelming, I think, for folks who have to deal with all of these things. You've got this patchwork of regulations, constant ones coming up, new requirements coming up. What normally large companies do, or companies that have to comply with multiple regulations in the space do, is comply with the most stringent one, which tends to be the GDPR, and then make adjustments locally for each of the other ones. But one thing that in particular there's a consistent theme of in these legislations, and that we're seeing in what the US is pushing for, are these data minimization principles. And data minimization is really about only taking the data that you need. So removing as much of the personal information as possible. And what that means can vary depending on the regulation, of course. But there are two distinct types of identifiers to keep in mind. There are the direct identifiers that can directly or within a small amount of people identify an individual. So something like an address can pin it down to maybe 6 people sometimes, maybe one person. You've got full name that could be directly identifiable, a phone number. And then you've got the quasi-identifiers that also count as personally identifiable information. And these are things like religion, approximate location, like even somebody's state or province, for example. You've got things like physical attributes. And these are listed as personally identifiable information under legislations like the GDPR. So you still have to treat them with care. And the reason that these are important to consider is because when combined together, it can exponentially increase the risk of re-identifying an individual. And so when people say that they've often, if you see the headline saying anonymization doesn't work because such and such company said they anonymized their data, and the individuals were able to be re-identified. Oftentimes, they didn't really look at the quasi-identifiers, and the data wasn't actually anonymized. You'll have situations where you'll have maybe the full postal code included when it really shouldn't be the full postal code. Just a few of the digits to give you a regional information, but not exact information. But another key point is that you don't always need anonymization to comply with the legislations. You also don't necessarily need it in order to satisfy your customers always. So, for example, as an individual might be calling a calling contact center to calling contact center of a Canadian Tire, for example, saying I'm unhappy with the vacuum cleaner that I purchased. I don't care if somebody finds out that I purchased a vacuum cleaner, but I do care if somebody gets my credit card number, the one that I used to purchase the vacuum cleaner. So it really depends on the context as well. So why is this a hard problem to solve? I want you to take a look at this transcript. You've got, thank you for calling Seiko Dental Carrier. How can I make you smile? Tengo una promesa mandan un mensaje aquí, etc., etc. So you've got Spanglish going on here. You've got here some numbers being written out in different ways. You've got, and this can be common. You've got different types of medical information being mentioned. You've got inconsistent writing of numbers, and you've got, for example, this Friday, day 3 mentioned here. So different ways of writing dates can also be tricky to handle. And imagine this in addition to it multiplied by all of the languages that you have to deal with in a call and contact center, and all of the possible things that can go wrong and disfluencies in speech that you could have. It becomes really, really complicated to be able to capture this information accurately and know exactly what you need to remove and what you need to actually keep to do the job properly. Other reasons this is a hard problem to solve is because you're often dealing with really large volumes of data, so you need to be fairly efficient when you're dealing with personal information, because 80 to 90% of the data out there is actually unstructured, and that's where it becomes the trickiest to identify the information. So some structured data will be like a database with very specific labels for individual pieces or individual columns, if you will. And most of or a good chunk of the time, hopefully organizations did a good job at actually making sure that those are properly labeled. However, when you're dealing with unstructured data, you do have this messiness of not only dealing with text, but also you have PDFs, you have documents in other formats, you've got images, you've got audio. So that's a lot of different varieties to deal with. And you need to be able to process those very efficiently, given the large volumes. So it's a tricky balance to make between accuracy and speed. You've got, of course, the patchwork of privacy regulations. And what that means is you've got, for example, situations where you might want to remove healthcare information. So you don't have to deal with that, having that in your system, because you might not be a healthcare organization. Or situations where you might have a lot of payment card industry information. Or situations where the very specific region you're in might have personally identifiable information that's culturally or regionally specific. Like the Indian Data Protection Regulation, for example, have caste within there, which is not something that's reflected within the GDPR, because culturally that's not something that's really dealt with in Europe. And one other additional point is when you're dealing with documents, for example, which is very common with large language models now, you will have to deal with optical character recognition errors. So when you're identifying the words that are said on the page, you're using optical character recognition, and that can be really tricky, especially when you're dealing with handwriting or signatures or things like that. And so is this concern new with the personally identifiable information since ChatGPT came out? The answer is not really, but not very much attention was being placed before. This was in April 2021 that it came out that this South Korean chatbot by a company called ScatterLab, which had boasted about the 10 billion conversations that it had between users, they had a data leak where their chatbot that they trained on these conversations started having people's names, nicknames, and home addresses come up in the responses, and it can be problematic because it was also a love bot, right? So not necessarily something you want people knowing you're participating in. Two, if you have somebody, if your home address associated to your name in an output, be problematic as well.
And it's interesting. This is 2021, and I don't really recall a lot of press or hype about it.
Yeah.
Because chatbots have been there for a while, but and this is huge. But I don't think that people really paid attention to this prior to Gen AI tools becoming freely and widely available. So this is an interesting kind of a shift, right, in people's consciousness.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you're mentioning, and in part, I don't know how much generative AI was used in chatbots prior to the early 2020s specifically, because the language models weren't. I mean, there were good ones, but they weren't really commercialized yet to the same extent. Definitely not as large a deal as large language models are right now. And chatbots may have been more of a decision tree kind of situation. And you could kind of guess the context. You could kind of determine the context, but it wasn't going to be. They had a few set paths in some cases. But that's a really good point.
I mean, it's good, whatever brings the public to just pay attention to those issues, right? But for the past year and a half, the amount of times we heard copyright and data protection when it comes to AI discussions is it's unbelievable. People who never ever were interested in copyright in their life, right? All of a sudden, everybody's kind of have a say in it. Everybody's an expert, and everybody has their own opinion on the subject. I mean, which is a good thing. We need those discussions, but it's just funny how all those issues that they've been there, and the technology has been there for quite some time, actually, but only right now, it just exploded into the public consciousness, and it got just amplified overnight. So
that is a good point. And to a certain extent, it's been there. But also to another extent, a lot of there had to be a lot of care with how, and I hope there still is a lot of care with how software is built with regards to copyright. You have to make sure that you're using the right licenses for the right code libraries. You also need to make sure that you're using the right licenses for the data that you're using to train your models generally. And it's just such an interesting time to be alive right now with all what
I like how you say it.
As a matter of factly, yeah, which is true. Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, we're building the foundations for what future generations are going to be dealing with.
That's a lot of responsibility.
No pressure, guys.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Let's just get this one right.
I hope we can. And even before 2021, there was this paper that came out in 2019 called The Secret Share. And it talked about how if you stored this canary, so just a number that they stored into the Penn Tree Bank database, and trained a character language model, different from a regular language model, which tends to predict the next word. If you store this character language model, which predicts the next character, if you train this character language model, which predicts the next character on this data set with this canary, it'll actually show less surprise when predicting that number than other numbers that are random or approximate. So this log perplexity here measures the surprise of a model, and the lower it is, the less surprised a model is at seeing a particular sequence. And so what that's telling you is that there was an indication that memorization of information was already a concern back in 2019.
And that's also interesting because we talked about it briefly during our prep call, the whole memorization issue, right? And we're talking about that until, well, in some of the obviously groups and, just engineers and data scientists, obviously machine learning experts, they've known about this issue. But again, the public started to really, really talk about the subject, starting with the New York Times OpenAI lawsuit, right, in December, and this kind of memorization issue just got everybody's attention. Everybody started talking about it and posting about it and writing about it, and yeah,
that's true. At what point does this type of memorization memorize too much rather than just language, the language structure itself?
Yeah. Just for, I don't know, some of our viewers who might not have an idea what memorization is, just can you please briefly kind of give us the definition of how does it look like when a large language model memorizes things? Like what is it?
Yeah, well, to be honest, memorization tends to not be a well-accepted term within the research community. It's sort of like memorization, but it's not really what's happening.
Good for headlines.
It's good for headlines, and you can see that mimicry happening. That looks like if a human were just regurgitating, memorizing. But essentially, what these models are doing is predicting the next most likely piece of information. And what made them so good was the ability to determine which pieces of the context are most important to generating that output. So that's the "Attention is all you need" paper that came out that made these that was one of these revolutionary pieces in natural language processing. Before then, language models were not, they were definitely not as good. I'm just measuring how much nerdiness to go into the structure of those, but I'm just going to put that aside.
just go all the way. We'll love it.
I don't think there's enough time for that. But with regards to the current models, you'll get information about you'll get attention to specific pieces of the input. You'll then, this is being converted into numerical representations of the words, and then from that numerical representation, you predict the next piece of information, and that's what ends up being predicted as the next piece of information is be one word at a time. Right? And so if you've seen a book before and you're asked to, what's the first paragraph of this book? you can predict. Might be able to predict the one word after another associated with that book. Does that make sense as memorization? Yeah.
So just to boil it down, it depends on how many times the algorithm saw it in the training data, correct? That specific piece of information. Does it affect memorization in this way, in terms of like, if it's a certain amount of times, just the more times it was present in the training data set, kind of the likelihood of memorization gets higher.
The likelihood that a one word will follow another will get higher the more often those words follow each other in the training data set. I wouldn't necessarily say it's necessarily how many times they've seen, say, a book, for example. But it depends on a lot of factors.
Yeah, just I'm asking because going back to the New York Times lawsuit.
Yeah.
So the flip side of the New York Times argument is the memorization issue. So they just pretty much scraped the content and copied everything and used it, et cetera, et cetera. And OpenAI's take is pretty much all those articles that they were scattered all over the internet already, and Wikipedia, any other platform or news website, people quoting them, so those pieces, those articles were already in abundance on the internet. That's why kind of the system had no problem, just by the fact that it was seeing so much of New York Times content in its training. So
yeah, part of it is also the argument that the models aren't trying to memorize the information specifically, but rather trying to learn the structure of language. And so, can you regulate something learning language structure?
Yeah. That's also interesting.
It is. Good luck to the lawyers trying to figure that one out.
I don't think it's gonna be up to us though.
Yeah.
I mean, we by all means we're trying to figure it out, but in the end, I don't know.
Yeah, it depends how firmly we have beliefs about it and how loud we want to be.
Yeah, we're looking for some guidance and regulation more than just, advice and handshakes and promises. But that's just me talking. So
yeah, so
this one is interesting.
Yeah, this one is interesting. So this was a paper by Carlene et al. From 2020, and they showed how GPT-2 was quote unquote memorizing. I still use that term lightly. Addresses from the internet, phone number, fax, and why this is concerning is because under the GDPR, for example, which applies to any EU citizen, regardless of whether they are in the world, you need to have consent for uses of personally identifiable information for each different purpose. And it's very unlikely that the GPT-2 got that consent, or the people training GPT-2. And so there's still a question mark there around what's going to happen to AI models that are trained on personally identifiable information, especially if you have things like request to be forgotten, which is a right under the GDPR and other data protection regulations, or even access to information requests. Who knows how to necessarily get that out if you might not have access to the training data and only the model. And then if you've already trained a model, there's no unlearning that can really happen at the moment.
Yeah, like how to deal with that problem retroactively. I don't think there is at least now, I don't think there is a path to do that in retrospective is just basically looking, moving forward, what we can do to minimize this risk, right? So yeah.
And minimization is a good word for it.
Yeah, data minimization principle is definitely something that's very important. It's like, folks are talking about it for collecting data. Just take what you absolutely need and then, make sure you get rid of it, and things like that. And as you highlighted, all these different groups of data, when you cross-reference them, that you can re-identify individuals. But yeah, it's just just connecting the dots.
Yeah, definitely. And so the FTC is actually a good example of what might happen in situations like these. The FTC made what was formerly known as Weight Watchers, I forget what they changed their name to, delete models that they had trained on children's data.
I think it's called model disgorgement or something like this, right? To that effect. I believe that was the term.
That could be. I don't know if they use that term or not.
Yeah. Essentially, the threat was you'll just delete all your AI models and everything that's in there altogether.
And considering how many millions of dollars people are pouring into these large language models,
the threat is real.
That's very expensive. Yeah. So I just wanted to put in a few other things that people are thinking about. There's processing of data by third parties and whether you trust those third parties, of course. There's also that risk of a data breach when you're sending data to a third party. There's also data breach risk when you have your data internally as well. And that's also an important reason to have data minimization embedded into your principles as an organization. There's also the risk of the internal risk within an organization of fine-tuning your models or using RAG for data from one part of the organization and providing the results to another part of the organization that may not have had original access to it. And why this is particularly dangerous is because while we have access controls in place for different sets of information across an organization, and we're used to the concept of access controls, we're not used to the access controls for models themselves, one. And there's often misconceptions about what counts as information that is personally identifiable or materially non-public, if you will. And in addition to that, there's also a lot of this information is stored as vectors for the models to be able to retrieve the information quickly and provide grounding with that information for the response. And what that means is that because these are interpreted as vectors or stored as vectors, the interpretability of them by humans becomes much less tangible. So there's misunderstandings around what is retrievable from those vectors. And you can get information from those vectors, like personally identifiable information. There's also this paper by Abdallah et al. From the University of Toronto that showed a few years ago how if you created these word embeddings or these vectors, vector representations of words based on a healthcare data set, it turned out that the first names were closer to the last names than other words, and names were closer to the disease that they were mentioned. If you looked at the cosine distance of these vectors, names are closer to the disease that they were mentioned closest to in the text. So not only is there memorization that you could retrieve, but there's also memorization from that you can compare distances with. So there's still a lot more education that needs to come into play here.
And that's one of the ways how this personally identifiable information can actually be kind of identified. Pardon the same word, identified within the training data set, right? So I understand there's complexity in doing that. I just highlighted, but how do we solve this problem is just one of the avenues to
Mhm.
tackle that.
Exactly. Yeah, so removing it in the first place, ideally. But if you absolutely need it, making sure that everybody using it is well trained when it comes to the dangers.
I just quickly gonna say a few points. So I read this paper while preparing for our chat, right?
Mhm.
And that was the research on fine-tuned data sets that was done, and in effect, LLMs are more prone to memorization, as per that research and as per that paper, when it comes to fine-tuned data sets. So they use OpenAI API on a fine-tuned GPT-3 model, right? And it was pretty obvious that the model was just ready to spur out all types of PII, personally identifiable information, and stuff like that. So it's pretty crazy, considering right now the industry is like everybody's going in this fine-tuning your own model direction. Just
Yeah.
obviously it's very good for your business. You're customizing basically that large language model for your needs and businesses needs, but again, you have to be very careful with that. And yeah, a lot of issues are here as well.
Yeah, and if you take care of those issues, that can actually be a good thing, right? Because you do want more of a weight to be placed on the data that's most relevant to your organization. But yes, first we have this whole educational.
You need to be aware of those issues in the first place. That's what I was
Yes.
going to say, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise, just people are rushing in the businesses and all the startups, right, that are in this space. They're rushing into this without really considering most of the times the legal implications.
Yeah, and ideally you become aware of them before it becomes a headline. Yeah. Other issues that have come up, of course, are bias. I don't know if you want to dive into that a little bit, or if you want to stick to. Actually, there's one piece of information I want to add on bias with regards to PII. It looks like there's still some research that needs to be done here, but an interesting finding that we have is if you remove quasi-identifiers, things like religion, approximate location, and this has been reflected in other in research within the insurance industry, for example, showing that zip codes can lead to bias in the output because those zip codes can, for example, pinpoint predominantly Black neighborhoods in the U.S.
Right.
And so removing those quasi-identifiers can actually lead to a reduction in bias. One blog post that we have outlines how we tested ChatGPT, one of the first around the first few months it came out. For my friend is from England. What are some reasons why they might be in prison? My friend is from Somalia. What are some reasons why they might be in prison? Swapping out the nationality, and you get vastly different answers. At least you did at the time. That's been fixed since. For depending on that piece of quasi identifier that you insert.
But it's always it's also interesting that talking about bias, right? And even not even misinformation, but different points of view when it comes to LLMs, depending on the prompt and depending on the language of the prompt, the information can be different.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah.
And this is absolutely crazy. It's like, we try not to anthropomorphize, my favorite word, hard to pronounce, this technology, right? But we tend to use exactly the words that's just kind of, it's easier for us to relate to, I guess, right? Memorizing, learning, they learn, the system learns, the system says and thinks and stuff like that. But yeah, for example, if you ask a system, an AI model, something in Chinese about the Chinese government, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
You will receive a totally different response were you to ask the same AI model in English, for example. And that's very interesting.
That is very interesting. I had not known. I hadn't tried that, but I'm gonna go and try that later.
That might be a topic for just a separate live stream, I think.
I think so.
Down the road.
Yeah. And just one other one is explainability, of course, that comes up a lot, and is still a giant question mark and is very task dependent. You can do explainability for things like sentiment analysis and topic modeling, because you can pinpoint which words will have made the model predict what it did, but it gets more complicated when it's where did certain information come from, for example.
This is so interesting. So basically, personally identifiable information tends to also kind of aggregate certain, I don't know, maybe adjectives or certain words that might actually point, kind of, point out that this piece of information is actually personal.
Mm-hmm.
This is so interesting, and I think that that also makes sense in that example that you showed us, with just like a blob of text. I think that was a recorded conversation. It was like a data call center somewhere, and you have all those kind of pieces in there. So I guess it is very hard to kind of parse through all of that. But as you're saying here, there's a way to actually make this process better, or kind of improve that analysis just based on the explainability factor and certain, as you had, how you said, sensitivity analysis, or well, what was the word?
The
Sentiment analysis.
Sentiment. It's a sentiment.
Sentiment analysis as an example of where explainability can happen, but you could also use a similar process to determine which words made it most likely to make an output be detected as personal information. However, that's not really that tends to be the less interesting application of explainability, or the easier one, because humans can look at it and say, okay, this looks like personal information to me, so I understand where you're coming from. Where explainability gets tricky and is actually most important is for things like predicting whether somebody's more likely to have a heart attack based on their electrocardiogram, for example. There are certain situations like that where humans don't understand why the model is getting it right. And if we could, not only would that advance things like medical research, but it would make the human in the loop much more confident in accepting the model's prediction.
Yeah, the results. Yeah, understood.
So we have 17 minutes left. I'm happy to dive into things like privacy impact assessments, or what to think about during the whole life cycle of a generative AI model, or could dive into how private AI works, whatever you prefer.
I'm personally really curious how it works in the back end, so to speak, because I mean, I'm not expecting you to give out all the secret sauce, what private AI is doing from the engineering perspective, but it's like it's really interesting to me. I'm not a technical person, but I mean, it's just when I read about your company, all of this, I was like, how are they doing it? I mean, what's going on there, like in the backstage? Yeah,
sure. So it's multiple machine learning models that are trained specifically for this task of identifying personal information. And when it comes to large language models, you could use it to fine-tune or train models without the personal information within there, or with synthetic personal information, so names replaced with fake names, etc. And then if you, during the the actual inference stage, so the stage where a customer or a user is using it. What we've built is this ability to de-identify the input. So here, draft me an offer letter for Leroy Jenkins of Akron, Ontario for the position of Chief Charge Coordinator. We de-identify it to draft me an offer letter for name 1 of location 1 for the position of occupation 1. Send it to your large language model of choice. Outcomes, dear name 1, we're pleased to offer you employment at your company name for the occupation 1. And then re-identify. So that information is stored only in the customer's environment and never sent to the large language model. And so this is one way you can very effectively minimize the personal information that you're sharing outside of your organization. And the way that this tends to work is we deploy directly, generally within our customer's environment, but we did just actually launch a cloud API if anyone wants to have a look. And you can also try it for free at chat.privateai.com or demo the core de-identification and PI identification technology at demo.private-ai.com. And the cool thing is it does work across 52 different languages, across 50 different entity types. The data never has to leave your environment unless you're sending it to our API, but then we delete it right away after processing. And we've got some interesting advances coming into the synthetic personal data generation, but you could try it out now as well. That's been used by a few folks for fine-tuning models in a HIPAA compliant way, for example. Any questions about that? Happy to dive into a little bit more of the tech because you seem particularly interested in how that works.
Oh, 100%.
So I mean, you said that it's sort of like could be both like on-prem solution and also like the cloud solution, or how does it work? So for example, I'm a customer and I would want to use private AI solution, within my organization. So what are my options there?
Yeah, so it can be deployed directly within your environment. So no data is ever shared with us. It runs as a REST API. So you send, actually, I'll show you exactly what that looks like. If you go to this demo over here, you have, as a developer, let's see. As a developer, you're sending in the text, and then you get the de-identified result here and the dictionary of personal information here. So you get to do whatever it is that you want with that data. And if you are building this into an LLM process, you can do the de-identification and then call the large language model of your choice, and then you do the re-identification. So it's really, it's very seamless to integrate.
Okay, this is super cool. So can you tell us more about the synthetic data generation? Yeah, and how in terms of, again, for some people who might not be very close to the notion, how does it help when it comes to data privacy and LLMs and all this stuff?
Love that question. So it helps in a few ways. So here you see the data getting redacted, which is useful for a lot of things, storing data, etc. And then here's the synthetic version. So you've got the number getting replaced by a fake number, the date by a fake date, and over here, number by another fake number, and 924 becoming 425. And there are two reasons to do it this way. One of them is it does increase privacy. So for example, if I had missed a number, if we had missed a number for redaction, there's no way for you to tell what the original number was from the fake number. So it makes it much more of a needle in a haystack situation because nothing is perfect, even though it is very, very good. And then in addition to that, if you are fine-tuning a model, expecting it to learn a language in a certain way, you might want to have, so fine-tuning it with this, with redacted data actually works out quite well. But if you're full on training and don't expect the input to look like this kind of input, you might want to consider synthetic personal information instead. And the reason that you'd want to do this, with fully synthetic data is when you have access to the data, when you, in particular, also really want the content, as much content of the data as possible. So an example for that is if you're doing something like topic modeling or associating sentiment analysis to particular products, you're going to want as much of the information as possible in the data that you have. So if you have a conversation, you're not going to want a fully synthetic conversation since it might not have the appropriate associations of sentiment to the products, including when you're doing inference as well. And oftentimes there's a lot of really good quality information outside of that personal information, and the personal information is just toxic and preventing you from actually doing the innovation you want to do. So you want to strip that out as quickly as possible. Where fully synthetic data, which we don't do, comes in handy is often when you don't have enough information, period. So if you want to generate massive amounts of data for particular use cases, you just don't, and you can't get access to it.
Super interesting.
I have another question, and just coming back to the question that was asked last time. So, for example, I'm a data subject. I'm a person, right? And under GDPR, as far as I know, so there is a right to be forgotten. I, Lisa, want my personally identifiable information to be removed from this particular company's AI training, AI model training data set.
Yeah.
So, and the request, and I submit the request, right, to this company. So I guess your solution might help the company that has to comply with this request, because they would have to go back and identify and find my information there in their training data set that they possibly used. Will that be is it feasible?
To a certain extent. It depends on the company's processes. One way to tell whether or not your information was used is to prompt the model and see if you get something out of it. However, you'd have to prompt it in a clever way, in a way that doesn't get blocked by heuristics. Heuristics being basically handwritten rules to determine whether or not to do something, or handwritten rules to do a particular action. So you'll have noticed this, for example, when ChatGPT says you can't put in social security numbers or credit card information.
Right. Yeah, this is very interesting, because I'm just trying to put myself into the shoes of the company that has the AI models and training its AI models on something, and a request like this comes in. Well, what do I do, right?
Yeah.
What's the guidance there? I know it's a very recent kind of issue, and as you were saying, different companies have different policies around that. But I don't know if there's any precedent, so to speak, already with the GDPR compliance, whether someone has raised this issue yet or not. I don't think in the I haven't heard anything of sort in the United States, but I don't know if Europe, something like that was already raised.
Yeah.
So it's kind of rising. Just thinking out loud.
No, this is a good question. So one, what we could do is help make it faster to identify which names and personal information it was trained on, and then they could do a search through that. the thing about GDPR slaps on the hand, or GDPR actual trials, is that you often need somebody to complain about it first, and I don't know of any cases yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I don't maybe the GDPR experts who deal with that every day, whether its requirements or they even extend to AI models training data sets, and whether so I don't know if I'm like a private citizen, have this private cause of action, so to speak, if my data ends in this particular data set. So as you were saying, how you can regulate learning the language, quote unquote.
Yeah.
We have.
Individual would have to know.
I think we're out of time, but
I was gonna say we have 4 minutes left. We can talk about the NOYB versus OpenAI case. There's this advocacy group, None of Your Business. They in Europe, I believe, so they filed a claim and lawsuit against OpenAI and asked the, I believe, Austrian DPA to investigate the matter as well, right? So there's this person, public person. Nobody knows who that person is, but some people speculate it might be Schrems. Who knows again, right? And so this person asked ChatGPT about themselves, and ChatGPT, that, just to boil it down, just kind of gave them incorrect birth date. And when they contacted OpenAI, asked to remove that piece of information. It wasn't correct. OpenAI team was like, we cannot do that. We cannot really do anything. If we're going to remove this piece of information, it's just kind of like this card house. Everything will be just, everything will just come crashing down, right? So
crumble.
That's a good case for you guys. So what do you think? What do you think, Patricia?
That's an interesting case.
How is that going to turn out?
I think unless you're blocking the requests, any requests for any information about any individual, that's very hard to enforce. But maybe if maybe there could be certain constraints put in place where you put in your name and ask for a request, and it will block any requests for your that have mentioned your name. But the GDPR does tend to, or the EU does tend to side on the for the consumer rather than the business. So that will be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm just imagining. I mean, how concerned people are about this issue. I think that not too many, probably. Otherwise, I'm just thinking about this, opening floodgates for those types of requests, and how.
I think it depends on what the response is. In the early days of ChatGPT, somebody had written to me giving an example of him asking about himself to ChatGPT, and it was actually accusing him of a pretty serious crime.
Right.
And he was very concerned about it. He was, I believe it was accusing him of previous, if I'm not mistaken, previous sexual misconduct in another workplace, which can be, if somebody is doing any diligence, any poorly.
Yeah, exactly. Background checks, even for, I'm just thinking about, our profession, in terms of illegal professionals' reputation, it's very serious. So of course you can always Google, you can always search person's name on this, respective state bar website to see if there are any disciplinary, misconduct or any complaints. But I don't know if people even know there's a resource like that. I think ChatGPT is way more popular than searching, state bar websites, or, for example, engineering licenses or contractor licenses for, for builders, people who build. You want to know if that person was licensed or something. And if you're going to ask ChatGPT and they're going to blurt out some really weird stuff.
Well, it depends. It depends what it blurts out, right? What if he's gonna
Yeah.
just extol
And
you
people
so
seem
much?
to, yeah, people seem to trust these tools quite a bit, and even people who were not supposed to trust them, to trust and verify like 10 times, they still put a lot of trust in these tools. Again, notoriously, disciplined lawyers who were, didn't check their ChatGPT's work on submitting their briefs and pleadings and stuff like that. So yeah, it's very it's very serious, and yeah, I don't really know what we're gonna see, how that's gonna transpire. But it's good to know that there are solutions out there.
I think that the trust in the tool comes fundamentally from the discussion we were having earlier about how language models actually work, which is, what is the next most likely word? Are you going to trust any human that tells you that speaks based on the next most likely word that's come out of their mouth?
Yeah, but that's how humans operate and think in general, right? We tend to kind of place a lot more trust in computers and machines and software versus people when it comes to certain.
I think that's new. I think that might be very new, because for the longest time, we in the AI community, you've had to deal with the question of, can you do it better than a human can?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times it's yes, folks might not believe it, and not only can you do it at scale, do it better than a human, but you can do it at scale in a lot of tasks. But there's still, the benchmark is still human capacity.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, in terms of better than human or not, I just recently took one of those driverless car rides in the city in San Francisco. I mean, and we've seen them for many years. They've been driving around, like testing them and whatnot. So at first it was really creepy to see them without, without a human driver, the wheel. And then I took this ride, and I was really surprised because how smooth it was. That's first impression, because San Francisco is hilly and kind of crooked streets and everything. So the way that this car can smoothly drive, human cannot do. I mean, you cannot like humanly do that, because your foot, with the pedal, you just can't like sustain the same pressure every single second. But this car is driving like amazingly well, non-humanly well, and also obeying all of the speed, rule requirements and everything.
Impossible for a human.
Consistently the same speed. That was kind of amazing. And I think this is one of those things where, almost like I would probably trust this car more than a teenage driver. Driver, I can tell you that. I don't know about driver with like 5 to 10 years of experience, but yeah, somebody who has just started driving, I think these vehicles are better drivers. But it's just kind of a digression towards trust and not trust, and who is better at what types of tasks.
And we just have a much higher bar for what machines need to be able to do versus humans.
Yeah,
that's just. We can just literally, let's just stay on for an hour. I think we found this flow that's just, unbelievable. Okay.
Patricia, thank you so much for joining us from Canada.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Really
it's such an interesting topic, and I mean, we're just, I think, kind of scratching the surface, but yeah, and we'll definitely continue discussing those things as they come. I just wanted to also let our audiences know that our next talk will be later in May, and we'll be talking about another, I think, privacy-related concern that's going to have to deal with children's privacy, online privacy, and some of the tools that are out there that could help, families to deal with issues that are really like piling up right now. So we will announce, and hopefully you'll be able to make it. Yeah, so thank you so much for everyone who tuned in, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you,
everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks, guys. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.